This is the conceptual poster introduction lecture for the ART161 graphic design course. Conceptual imagery is a really powerful tool within graphic design. And we're going to be exploring incorporating wit into your design work and look at some methods and strategies for creating conceptual imagery and highlighting some of the importance of this type of thinking within your work. And oftentimes this incorporates an element of wit or smart thinking to your design that can aid in the visual communication. And essentially what you're looking for is a response in the viewers that has this sort of smile in the mind when we think of how the viewer's reaction is happening to this imagery. So for this project, you will be using conceptual imagery to create a poster that relates to a social issue or a social cause of your choice. And you're going to use conceptual imagery to arrive at the best solution for your design. Now, if we look at some examples here of conceptual imagery, we can see kind of what this is all about. And most of the time, this has to do with infusing two ideas into one. So over here on the left, we can see this combination of hands that are reaching out in both directions. And this is really intended to help you understand what Amnesty International is all about. We can see that we have this larger hand up at the top and this positive and negative space that's showing these multiple hands that are reaching up towards this larger one, almost like showing this sort of assistance or help that is provided through Amnesty International. Now, on a little less serious note, we see this example of substitution on the right, where they are substituting out the ice cream for these film reels. And the idea here is that this was created for a summer film festival. So they're really thinking about two ideas here that are related to each one of those concepts. Summer being ice cream. Generally, we think about, within the summertime, ice cream being this nice, cool treat that we can enjoy. And then the film reels tying in this aspect of film. And they're still making the film reels almost look like a sort of ice cream figure here. But what it does is it creates this sort of imagery that as a viewer, you come in and have to kind of decipher what's going on within the imagery. And here's some other examples here as well. This is a series that was done for IBM by the artist Noma Bar. And they're very simple illustrations, but they're very effective. And another thing to consider here is what the text, or what we consider the copyright, is saying and how that can help to support the imagery. And each one of these, that is being shown as well. So over here on the left, we have this idea of any child can access a first-class education. And they're tying in these ideas of something that is tied to an older style of writing and dictating, a calligraphy pen, and a newer accessory to that, which is this USB cord. And again, they're substituting or merging these two things into one image. Same thing over here in the middle, where we have now every doctor knows you personally. And they're kind of using this stethoscope to kind of show the face of the doctor and creating this large smile within the space, acting as a sort of friendly reminder of that. And then on the right, we can see that they're using the positive and negative space here. And that copyright says banks now hold up robbers. And we have this sort of large hand coming into the space. And then within the negative space of that, we sort of see this face, almost like a robber's mask, that is being shown to showcase that further. So as we learned in the graphic translation project, this sort of thinking can be incorporated into logos as well. And although this unit will really focus more on complex visual imagery, it is important to consider how this can be utilized for more simplified imagery, such as logos. And I believe we looked at this in the previous lecture. This is the Time Warner logo. And what they're doing here is they are showing two different elements that are required to view television. They have an eye with the sort of pupil in the center and this large arch over the top, and then this sort of ear, which is happening and tied into the center of that. And both of those things are what we use to watch television, right? So they are kind of using this conceptual imagery to showcase that within the single mark of the logo for the brand. Now, one of the requirements for logos is that they need to be very simple and they need to be reduced and graphic in their representation. Some of these requirements will be removed for this project, but as we can see, again, some very simple sort of logos that are utilizing conceptual imagery. We have the Kona Coffee Company, which has this sort of hibiscus flower, and those petals are being substituted out by the coffee mugs. We have the Tall Tales Real Food, which is a restaurant that specializes in wild game. And so they're showcasing that within the sort of negative space of the deer's antlers here with the fish and the duck. And then we have the logo for Gotham Books, which is a publishing company out of New York. So they are referencing both these open books and at the same time referencing these sort of skyscrapers, which are associated with the New York landscape. So what makes conceptual thinking so powerful and what makes viewers appreciate them so much? Well, we can look at some of these different bullet points here and kind of dive into these a little bit further. The first thing we're going to look at is time. This saves time by the incorporation of multiple elements into one idea or one image. There's also this idea of participation. People need to sort of interact in order to understand, and that delay where you're sort of decoding what that image is creates this reward system, which makes this type of thinking very universal and very powerful. It also creates this sort of amusement, within the element of either humor or this sort of very subtle touch like we saw within some of those logos or those previous examples. Not necessarily laughing out loud, but again, kind of creating this sort of smile in the mind or this amusement that is very powerful to create a deeper connection with the viewer. This is also a universal sort of way of thinking or showcasing imagery. Most of the time, these ideas can be understood by everyone without even the association of some sort of assisted text. And that can be very powerful to be able to span multiple different languages or multiple different cultures in order to showcase that. We also have a bond. A connection is formed from this process by decoding. It makes the customer feel a sort of bond or movement within the company. And this creates this sort of deeper process of decoding and the amusement that comes from it that makes it resonate even deeper as well. And through all of this, this creates a much more memorable either mark or graphic. And that message there can be incorporated to help the viewer remember what it is that you are trying to showcase here and communicate beyond just a surface level. So this is why we're kind of emphasizing this so much and why it's important to incorporate wit into your work. This is an example here by the designer Woody Purtle. And this is again for Amnesty International. And the idea here is stopping gun trafficking. So they have this silhouette of a gun that is made from traffic sign arrows. And these arrows signify trafficking and the movement of guns. And that tells us automatically that this is related to guns and the movement of guns. So how do we kind of come to these decisions on our own? Well, this is where there's a little bit of research and thought development that goes on before you even get into your imagery, right? If we think about breaking this up and really even taking some of the words from the messaging, guns and trafficking, right? For gun, they're using the silhouette of a gun. And for trafficking, they're actually relating this to actual traffic and traffic signs. And by merging those two things together, we have a stronger relationship here of that imagery and that message. This is an example here by James Victoria, and this is really about racism, where he's sort of animated the scene by giving teeth and using red to show how vicious racism can be. Now, I'm going to show you one technique that is helpful, and all I want you to explore, and I want you all to explore this and really think about this sort of way of incorporating surrealism into your work. So this often takes the place of things that we're expecting to see. And one thing that we'll be talking about here is putting the familiar in an unfamiliar place. This is a painting by the artist Magritte, and he really uses this juxtaposition with the sky being brightly lit in the daytime and this dark sort of front porch that we would not see in a typical day, right? We wouldn't necessarily see this very dark night setting with a clear sky up above. So it's creating this surrealism within the space that we can utilize for this project as well. So how do we come up with these ideas ourselves? How can we incorporate more conceptual thinking into our work? And how can we break the problem into smaller tasks to find these unusual and unique solutions? One of the first things that you are going to do is you are going to create a list or a mind map. And there's a template for this in the module. You're going to come up with different words related to your concept or your issue or your cause. And this helps us to see these connections between the words and concepts. So when we think about creating a list or a mind map, once we have those, we can start to create these forced connections. And again, put this familiar in an unfamiliar place. This is an example here of a list that we can see. And they are thinking about Asian culture and women and this idea of lookism that is being used. And you can see that they are coming up with words related to each one of these topics. And through these different words and these ideas, they're starting to think about conceptual ways that they can incorporate this into the same space. So based on that list, they're creating these forced connections. They're actually taking different words from the different lists and incorporating them into one. Again, using surrealism and putting the familiar in an unfamiliar place. And this is an example from a previous student here, where we can see that they come up with some sketches that could potentially be used for this project. And then they have their final design over here on the right. So not only are you going to be using imagery, which will be the main focus of this, but you're also going to include some sort of text or some sort of messaging that helps to support that imagery. And somewhere typically along the bottom of your poster, I do want you to also have a call to action, which is essentially something that allows people to find out more about that topic. Oftentimes for this project, that's going to be some sort of website that maybe you found through your research that is already an existing website that you can drive traffic to in order to help the viewer to find out more information about whatever your social issue or cause is. So when we think about breaking this down a little bit further, if we think about a list for, say, San Diego Film Festival, one thing that we could do is create some ideas or some visuals that are related specifically to San Diego, not even considering film at this point, and then create a list that is specific to film and not even related to San Diego. And through these different words, we can start to create these forced connections, whether it's the skyline of San Diego and a clapboard that's used for filmmaking, or the Coronado Bridge and substituting that with a film reel, kind of similar to what we saw for the summer festival for the ice cream, or even taking tacos, which is one of our favorite treats here in San Diego, and kind of using this idea of merging that into this sort of camera. Now, all of these, again, would never be seen in real life. These are putting the familiar elements that we are used to in an unfamiliar place. So some techniques for creating conceptual imagery. Now that you have created your word associations, you're going to begin to explore connections between them. And you're going to think about what techniques can we use to assist us in expanding on these word associations to create a conceptual image. So the first one that we're going to look at is addition. And this is a visual here that was created for the United Nations poster for peace. And there is an additive element to create meaning and increase the understanding of this project by having this very simple graphic related to a trash can and this large bomb. We're really talking about this idea of throwing away war and thinking about how we can use that to kind of create peace within the sort of visual that we are referencing. We also have substitution. This actually takes an element that is already existing, in this case within the text, and they're substituting out the E with this bee here. And we can see the kind of stripes being used within the body of the bee and then the additional wings and head on top. Omission is this idea of removing a portion of an element. Here we have this cover for Bloomberg Business Week. And the omission of the image and this sort of spinning wheel of death that you may be used to if you're a Mac user it makes us envision this sort of crash and tells us that we're waiting for something to happen. And this is related to the article that's included within the magazine. And it creates this very clever sort of smile in the mind that that forces you to decipher what's going on within the imagery, and again creates all those benefits from conceptual imagery. Ambiguity is when something becomes two things at once. So here we see a campaign by Guinness where they've created this simple icon and put it into different situations. The advertisement is referring to it being extra cold. So they're combining this with subjects that are related to being cold, whether it's a fan or ice cream. Trompe-l'oeil, it comes from fine art, and this is where you make something look real. So here we have an example of this shopping bag, and it's actually using the string of the bag and incorporating that into the illustration, and it sort of tricks the eye into thinking that it's real. Then we have economy, and this is when something has a double use. This is another example where the season finale of Friends is being reorganized here to show that this ends on Friday, and they've dissected the logo for the Friends show and they've moved it to the front to create a more effective read that relates to the actual messaging. And lastly, we have transformation. This is another technique that is interesting, which transforms elements that, such as continents, into these specific silhouettes, in this case, animals. So if we go back to the original concept here, this that we talked about in the beginning of the lecture, this piece by Woody Pertol, we see this conceptual image of gun trafficking. And we can see, again, some of the benefits and how we are using this idea of substitution and ambiguity here to further the message that they are trying to do. These are just a few examples here. The problem and the solution, utilizing a hazard sign and tying that into a sort of windmill effect, which we use to generate energy. We see here an example of a sort of wine glass that is separating the car from the house, which would obviously create a very unsafe drive if you were trying to drive over that void, and related to drinking and driving. So to get started with this project, the first thing that you're going to do is think of a social issue or cause that affects people within the society. And this could be something that is a group of common problems in present day society and ones that people may strive to solve. I find that sometimes picking something that is more personal to you results in a stronger sort of graphic within your final idea and representation. So spend a little bit of time on this and think about what might be used best for this project. Once you've come up with some sort of social issue or cause, you're going to start to explore and research that topic related to the social, environmental, or political issue. Based on that research, you're going to create the mind map or the list, and you're going to start to create these force connections between the ideas on that list. Now you're going to produce 10 to 15 sketches of what your poster could look like and start to visually depict this subject matter on your stance. And then you're going to finalize the chosen sketch that you think is working best and start to accompany that with some sort of messaging, some sort of text that's going to further define what it is that you are showcasing. And finally, you're going to create your final work on an 18-inch by 24-inch format using Adobe Illustrator and any other additional programs that may be necessary, such as Photoshop or any other programs that you feel are best suited for that project. So this is just a final example here of the list of word association. And this is actually from the template that's found in the module. And you can see that there are 3 lists. And in each one of these lists, there is numbers 1 through 15. So for this one here, they're using economic equality as the key word, wealth as the next keyword, and then shortage. And they're thinking of words or visuals that are related to each one of these ideas. Based on each one of these ideas and the words that are associated with them, they're starting to create these force connections. This was the thumbnail sketch that they chose to explore for this project, which is this sort of large vacuum that's sucking up the money from this piggy bank. And the vacuum is kind of representing a sort of businessman, if you will. So you're going to start with these very simple, very quick thumbnail sketches for the 10 to 15 sketches. These do not need to be incredibly detailed. We call them thumbnail sketches because generally they're rather small. They're not extremely detailed. They're just used to kind of get the idea across. And once you've chosen which thumbnail sketch you're going to use, I want you to finalize your sketch with some sort of messaging. So here you can see now that they've decided to use this idea, they're kind of fleshing out their idea further, right? They're starting to think about how this could be shown a little bit larger and a little bit more detail, and including not only the imagery, but starting to think about the messaging that will be included within this as well. Based on that final sketch, this is what you're going to use to graphically translate. And this is the final poster that this student came up with. And they did a really nice job of illustrating this and pairing this with some messaging that feels balanced within the composition and uses limited colors, but creates this conceptual image that puts the familiar in an unfamiliar space and uses surrealism to create all those benefits we talked about earlier. So this is the goal of this project, and this should help you to get started. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.